Well, hi there, everyone. It's John here from Bethel. Welcome to our YouTube channel, especially if you're a newcomer to us. It's great to have you with us today. And I'm really grateful for the chance on this podcast to to catch up with, not to chat up Phil, but to catch up with Phil, who's I've known for, well, it was when I was studying up in Spurgeon's College. So that was a while ago now
A
that
long
we
time ago, yeah.
yeah, let's not talk about how long ago that we connected. But Phil, as well as being in regional ministry for the Northern Baptist Association, is also part of the ICF, which is the Industrial Christian Fellowship. Now, Phil, for people who don't have a clue what that is or what that means, can you just kind of give us a summary of what the fellowship is?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, Industrial Christian Fellowship is a very ancient, if you like, charity, founded over 100 years ago. And it was founded by the coming together of two existing organizations. One was the Navi Mission, which was a real kind of bottom-up, hands-on mission to some of the most disadvantaged people in society at the time. And disadvantaged because of the job that they did, which I think is something we might come on to a little bit later. And at the other end of the spectrum was an organization called the Christian Social Union, which was actually largely a group of academics and Oxford dons who were waking up to the fact, and it's almost impossible for us to imagine this, but at the time, it was still a relatively novel idea that perhaps some of the issues of poverty and social exclusion in society could be resolved. There were underlying causes that could be addressed. At the time, there was almost a belief, well, you're just born into whatever sector of society, whatever layer of society you are, and that's that. If you're poor, you're poor. If you're rich, you're rich. Get on with it. And so these Oxford professors were sort of saying, nah, no, no, it's more complex than that. It's not that simple.
Mm.
And both organizations after the First World War were kind of looking for a way forward. And somebody somewhere decided it would be a great idea if the two joined together.
Mm.
And actually, there was a really unique fusion. So at one level, you've got this organization that is working in the Navi camps in up and down and reservoirs and railways and goodness knows where. The other end of the spectrum is a bunch of real deep thinkers and said, let's put you together and see how you can help as we try and rebuild society post First World War. So that's how Industrial Christian Fellowship came about, to be honest.
Mm, mm. And how about how you got involved in it? I mean, how did it come across your
Yeah.
view?
Okay. Well, if I'm really honest, I got in trouble. I got in trouble. I got involved. I probably did get in trouble as well, but I got involved as a favor for a mate. If I'm honest, this guy at the time, he said, "Look, I've been asked to get involved in this charity. It's kind of needs a bit of a rebirth. I need some trustees. How about you help us?" And I originally actually went along, almost a little bit like as I do as a regional minister, as a kind of consultant figure to say, well, let me help you do some workshops. Let me help you think about what your reasons for being are, what's your purpose, all the stuff
Mm.
that someone like me would do with a local church. And as a consequence of that, they said, well, we really like the vision you've helped us put together. Would you like to become a trustee? And so I said, oh yeah, just for a while, just to help you get started, I'll do that. And 20 odd years later, I was obviously only 7 at the time, but 20 odd years later, I'm still there. I'm still part of it.
Mm. Mm.
Well, I chair it now. That's even more exciting, isn't it?
Yeah. So I know from knowing you, but also from other stuff that you've written, that this whole thing about connecting work and faith is not just an incidental side theme for you. It's something that you're passionate about. And I know some of the things that you've written about are to do with those red hot topics that people live with and wrestle with, and then get no airspace at all in churches. So why do you think there seems to be continually this huge divide between Monday to Friday, Monday to Saturday, and Sunday?
Well, that's a massive question. Um, I think there are a lot of answers, ways we might answer that. Obviously you've got to ask different people, but I guess for a lot of people, work is difficult, work is stressful, And so maybe church is part of their escape
mm,
from that. And so really, we don't want to bring the mess of life into church. Now, I happen to disagree with that. I tend to be very polite when I visit churches, but anybody who says leave all your troubles at the door and come and
mm,
worship God, I'm afraid to say no, 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 bring them with you.
mm, mm,
So that would be I think part of the answer. I think sometimes it's because we don't always know how to deal with that stuff. It's difficult stuff,
mm,
and I don't know. Maybe sometimes as church we feel we have to have an answer,
mm,
and I think part of my whole view of my pastoral ministry really is I don't think we have to have an answer. I think we have to have a space where people can wrestle with the questions.
mm, mm,
So work is complicated. People are making difficult decisions, and I think part of my passion personally is because I just found myself. And this isn't to be unkind to the church I grew up in, but when I was working for a living, I was involved. I was working for a big shipyard
mm,
that was going through a major industrial dispute, the kind of stuff that's happening at the moment
mm, mm,
in a lot of our workplaces. And this was in the headlines. This was on TV. This was on the news. And I would sit in church on Sunday night, really dreading going back to work the next day, facing all of this. But
mm,
what struck me was not once did anybody say to me, "How is it? How are you?
mm,
Can
mm.
we pray for you?" And that really stayed with me because I thought, this was, you can't say people didn't know. It was a big news story.
Yeah.
You may remember at the time, shipyards and you had the flying pickets and all the stuff going on. And
Mm,
and just to not be involved in that. And then right at the other end of the spectrum, I was a trade unionist. I was in the electrical trade union, so the electricians union.
mm,
And at the time, there was an electricians trade union in Poland in the shipyard in Gdansk, and one of their trade union secretaries, a guy called Lech Walesa, was beginning to disturb and sort of raise all kinds of questions about the way society was. And as a consequence of the solidarity movement, massive changes
mm,
took place in terms of breaking the Soviet bloc. And
mm.
so, I saw that some of the things I was praying for as a Christian, we were all encouraged when we were teenagers to pray for the persecuted Christians behind the Iron Curtain. And
Yeah.
what I was seeing happening as a trade unionist was
Mm,
bringing about the thing that we were praying for.
mm, mm,
Sorry, I've not really answered your question. That was a very political thing to do, because you said to me, "Why
mm,
don't?" And I don't know, but why do I want to see it happen? Because I just see such incredible resonance
mm,
between
mm,
the things that matter to us as Christians and what we face at work. And it's only through work that many of us will bring about the change that we desire.
mm,
You can't
mm,
separate it. You can't separate the two. That would be my thing.
mm. I love that, Phil. I think there's a lot in there. I think you did start to answer the why question.
Mhm.
And I'm interested in this whole thing about whether church is a space where you come to escape, or whether it is where you come
Mm,
and bring your
yeah,
whole self, and where it's okay to say it's really rough right now, or it's really
yeah,
tough, or to celebrate the big wins as well, and
mhm,
bring who that is.
yeah,
Um, and the other part of the answer that you gave, which I thought was quite interesting, was are we willing to engage with some of the deeper issues when there aren't easy answers to what it means to run a business in a very competitive, ambitious world as a Christian, what it means to try and offer fair wages in a world that's all about profit and loss. And those things are hard, and often there's a tension to be found or a balance to be found. And we're not always that good at holding things in tension and finding a balance between things.
mhm. Yeah. I think you're right, and I guess again it comes down to our courage as a Christian community. We're not going to agree. I
Mm,
mean, that's the
mm,
basic thing. You get up and ask your congregation what they're all going to vote for in the next election if you want to start a church dispute. And I think actually, if we're at our best, we can show society how to disagree appropriately.
mm,
So, as a trade unionist, I was always of a view that, some of the guys that I was answering to, so to speak, kind of had this idea that I was the opposition. And
mm,
I'm kind of saying, look, we all want the same thing. We all
mm,
want a really productive workforce coming in and getting the best. And trade unions, which was my kind of thing at the time, I was a manager as well. And there were times when I crossed picket lines. And trust me, if you're the branch secretary of a trade union and you
mm,
cross a picket line, your life is not a pleasant thing.
mm,
And there were
mm,
times when I organized strikes.
mm,
And it was trying to say, do you know, actually, it's not about one ideology or the other. It's about what is fair, what is just, what is right.
mm, mm,
And again, we should have a lot to say about that. But I
mm,
think it moves us. And I think this is the thing. You get a group of Christians together and they'll all agree. We need to speak up for justice. We need to speak up for what is right.
yeah.
That's the easy bit. Then to say, well, actually, we may just have different ideas about what is right and what is
Mm,
just.
mm,
Um, and that would be true at the moment. You know, what is right and what is just, if you're a
mm,
health worker, may feel very different to what is right and what is just if you're a budget holder in the
yeah, yeah,
NHS,
yeah.
because you know there's a balance, and it's maybe it's easier just to sing nice songs to each other than to grapple with what does the kingdom of God look and feel like in
Mm,
21st century Britain, which I think is what we need to ask.
mm,
And it
mm,
matters. I mean, you actually introduced me as a regional minister for the North Baptist Association. I'm actually the Northwestern
mm,
Baptist Association. The reason I'm saying that is because it includes North Wales, which I
mm,
know is a land that is close to your heart.
mm,
Um, and I was running a faith and work group in Northwest England, so it was up sort of in the Wirral. And there was a guy who used to come to that group and travel from Anglesey or Innismon, which
mm.
is probably an 80-mile journey.
Wow.
And I said to this guy, you know, this is a long way for you to come. You know,
Yeah.
this is an amazing commitment. Thank you so much for taking the trouble. And he said, this is the only place that I can come. He
Wow.
said, in my job at the moment, I'm having to make significant numbers of people redundant. I'm
Mm,
having to tell organizations that their funding is being withdrawn,
mm,
and see the devastation that that's causing.
mm,
This is the only place where I can come and feel safe telling other Christians how it feels.
mm,
And
mm,
I thought,
mm,
gosh, I mean, at one level, that's a wonderful compliment, but
mm,
equally, shouldn't our churches be like that? Shouldn't it
mm.
be a place where you can just tell other people how it is?
Mm, absolutely, and you know you see Paul, don't you, when he's writing to some churches, not hiding from, but actually highlighting it, you know, and
Mm,
in a letter that's going to be read to a whole church, so with people who own slaves and people who were slaves and former
yeah.
slaves that were now
Yeah.
free,
Mhm.
telling them all about, you know, okay, you're going to have to sit there and listen now to instructions to masters, instructions to slaves, and I know
Yeah.
that word slave can be loaded, but it was, you know, contextual. But Paul doesn't duck it, you know, he doesn't hide from the issue.
No,
He
no.
actually
Mhm.
raises it.
Yeah. And I think the other end of the spectrum for me is also our scriptures aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. You know, one of my favorite verses in the Bible, and I can't remember where it is now, it's in the book of Deuteronomy, but it says, dig a pit outside the camp where you can relieve yourselves. And I
Mm,
love the fact that actually there, right in the middle of God's law, is the real, very practical reality of public health and
yeah,
sanitation.
yeah,
There's another little bit in Leviticus that talks about when you put a roof on your house, making sure that there's a parapet in case somebody falls off it,
yeah,
and thinking, you know, here's the first health and safety guide. And so I love, yeah, you're absolutely right. At one level, there's this high end stuff that we need to be prepared. But I think the other end of the spectrum is also to say, you know, whatever job you're doing,
yeah,
whatever you do for a living, don't imagine that it doesn't matter to God,
yeah,
because
yeah.
you would be surprised when you really look at the scriptures how many issues of
Mm,
public health, health and safety, weights
mm,
and measures,
mm,
it's all there. You know, God cares about how we do our work and how we do
yeah,
our jobs.
yeah. I remember a couple of years ago taking a trip with Tia Fund out to Ethiopia, and they were talking about the self-help groups that Tia Fund were helping
Yeah.
and supporting out there. But one of the things that we got introduced to, and we just had an afternoon with this one guy who was part of something called Farming God's Way. One of the fascinating things was that they were taking some parts that you've just described in other parts of the Old Testament as a hand guide, as a handbook to how we should farm. And the results that they were seeing were absolutely dramatic about letting the land have a furlough year and all the rest of it, circulating crops. And it's not this sort of spiritual sort of, how to
Yeah.
sort your heart out. It's actually about the land. And that
Mm,
struck me as
yeah.
something quite vivid, and due to that, then, and the results they were seeing, the government were actually asking for advice from
Yeah.
this handful of Christians that just were taking the Bible seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I'd love to challenge you on that is that little, I know it was a slightly giveaway, but you said, and it's not spiritual. Because I
Mm,
kind of want to see, but it sort of is.
mm,
Because actually, if people are starving, or the land isn't producing the crops it needs to produce, or the land is being ruined because it's being overfarmed, ultimately that becomes a spiritual experience. When
mm,
people are
mm,
hungry, when you're mourning those whose lives are impaired. So again, I think part of my passion for ICF is I think the minute we start drawing lines about human experience and, well, this is spiritual, this isn't spiritual, this is sacred, this is secular, I
mm,
think
mm,
we're missing the point.
mm,
Because I think there's actually a dynamic of spirituality in everything.
mm.
If your train is late, it's a spiritual experience. You're stressed, you're annoyed,
Yeah.
you're potentially angry. So, even getting a train to its destination on time is
Mm,
actually contributing to the spiritual well-being of another human being.
mm,
Um,
mm, mm,
and
mm,
and and I know I'm probably over egging the pudding there to some degree, but yeah, I just think that's kind of what I want to do. I want to live in that messy space that
mm,
says
mm,
it's not that simple. The
mm,
divisions aren't that hard.
mm,
Life is much richer and much more interestingly complex than all of that. And I
mm,
think that makes church an exciting place. And I think there's a missional dimension to this.
mm,
And it goes back to, to the point I made about when I was involved in something that was in all the newspapers.
mm,
And my experience of church at the time was it was silent on it. Now, if we're going to be a missional church, then actually, if people are going to come to our churches, if they're
mm,
going to actually walk through the door and say, this is of relevance to me, they need to hear God's people praying about the stuff that bothers them. They
mm,
need to hear God's people talking about the stuff that concerns them. And,
mm,
interestingly, one of our biggest downloads at the moment on our ICF website is a piece I wrote years ago called Should Christians Strike?
mm,
Because
mm,
strikes are, whatever you feel. There are some people who think we should be on the picket lines
mm,
with the people who are striking. There are other Christians who think it's appalling that these people are going on strike.
mm.
What matters to me is that Christians are talking about it, because that's what
Yeah.
everyone else is talking about. So I
Yeah.
think there's a missional dimension to it too, that if we're going to be a church that's relevant, we have to be a church where this stuff is talked about.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
yeah,
Yeah. I know your colleague John Weaver's put together a small group study resource, and if you're part of Bethel and would like to
yeah.
talk more about it,
Mm,
we'd love to connect you or reconnect you with one of those groups. Um, I sense, Phil, that we could talk for much longer about this, but as
yeah.
time is racing on, perhaps we could just land on, if somebody's listening to this and they're just thinking about their job and they can't make the connection, they can't think why
Yeah.
God would be interested, or can't imagine that there's anything spiritual. There's quite a hard line in their mind.
Mhm.
What do you think one thing they could do would be, just to take a step towards just recognizing that God is interested in their workplace?
I think at the very least, and I've had this conversation. I mean, I have this wonderful high view of work. And I'll often, after I've spoken at something, someone will come to me and say, "Yeah, but let me tell you about my job. Let me tell you how awful." And I think, yeah, but actually, for you, it is even more important that you don't lose sight of that,
Mm, mm,
because even your discontent can become a God-given discontent.
mm,
I mean, you've also kind of queued me up to talk about the other book that John and I have written, which is called Love Work.
mm,
And again, I kind of want to say to people, well, even if your job is rubbish or it feels rubbish, your attitude as a Christian can be good. And one of the little sort of, so we came up with these sort of 10 commandments for work and said, well, go into work and be diligent, be prayerful, be positive, be forgiving, because actually it matters. And as I said to someone the other day, no matter how bad your workplace is, as a Christian, you have the opportunity to be the reason people are glad they were there. You can still be someone people are glad to work with, even if the job is awful. And I think that's kind of it. I hope work is better than that. But I think if you start with that, maybe that then creates the resolve to say, let's make work better. Let's look at why things are so terrible. And interestingly, a lot of it is down to people. There's a little aspect of part of my job, which isn't directly to do with the Baptist family, but it's a piece of work I do that most people would really envy and say, oh, we wish we had the chance to do that. It's a great piece of work, but the person I do it for really does make it very difficult for me. It really, that experience has really kind of re-galvanized my commitment to this, because I think, actually this isn't a joy. And the reason it isn't a joy is because the person who oversees it is not actually a great person to work with. Now, let me say this is a piece of work I do outside of the Baptist community, just in case anyone, but it's quite interesting to realize that how much of our experience of work is not down to the job we do, but it's down to how we interact with the people we do it with. And we can make that difference as Christians.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Phil. Thank you. And the book you just mentioned, the reflections on love work, is fantastic.
Yeah,
so I'll pop a link in the description if anyone wants to get a copy. It's well worth a read. Really helpful stuff.
And I don't know whether your church has got our lovely drink mats, but we do a drink mat to go with it that you can stick on your desk or on your workbench at work, just to remind you to maybe just be a nice person while you're in your workplace. So make sure you get some of them, Jonathan, and give them out to your congregation with generous abound.
Well, we need reminders, don't we? Because of that.
I love I'm a great fan of the book, The Nudge Unit. And one of the nudges that make us live as better people. So that's the idea of that, to be a little nudge every day. And please buy the book as well, because it's great.
Well, thank you so much, Phil. Well done for getting a plug in there at the end. That was good. That was just seamless.
Absolutely
plug.
Seamless. Yeah, brilliant. But something's got to keep me in retirement. So
talking about work,
yes,
thanks ever so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been great to come along, and I hope that doing this together with small groups is a blessing to you.
Thanks, Phil.